There's a story running your life right now. You didn't write it. You probably don't even remember learning it. But it's there, dictating your choices, limiting your possibilities, whispering what you can't do, can't have, can't become. This story has more power over you than any person ever could. And here's what makes it dangerous. You think this story is you. You think it's reality. You think it's just the way things are. But it's not. It's just a story. And stories can be changed. I want you to think about the last time you stopped yourself from doing something. Really think about it. What was the voice that held you back? What did it tell you? I guarantee it wasn't based on facts. It was based on a story about your capabilities, your worth, your past failures. These stories didn't appear overnight. They've been building for years, decades. Every criticism you internalized, every failure you magnified, every success you dismissed. They all became part of this narrative, this internal script that plays on repeat. You carry these stories like invisible baggage. They weigh you down, they slow you down, they keep you small. And the cruelest part? You defend them. When someone challenges your limitations, you argue for them. You provide evidence. You make a case for why you can't change. But what if I told you something that might shake you to your core? What if I told you that the person you think you are is just a collection of stories? Stories that someone else started. Stories that you've been unconsciously editing and rereading your entire life. Think about your childhood for a moment. Not the events, the interpretations, the meanings you assign to what happened. A teacher's harsh comment became proof you weren't smart. A parent's distraction became evidence you weren't worthy of attention. A friend's rejection became confirmation you weren't lovable. None of those interpretations were facts. They were stories. Stories created by a child's mind, trying to make sense of a complex world. But that child is gone. You're an adult now, yet you're still living by those childhood stories. Here's what's even more disturbing. You seek evidence to support these old stories. Your mind filters reality to confirm what you already believe about yourself. You notice every failure. You dismiss every success. You remember every rejection. You forget every acceptance. This isn't your fault. This is how the human mind works. It seeks consistency. It wants to be right. Even if being right means being limited. Even if being right means being miserable. You've become the prisoner and the guard. The victim and the victimizer. The author and the character. All at the same time. And the most tragic part? The door to your cell has been open this entire time. But recognizing this isn't enough. Understanding it intellectually won't set you free. Because these stories live deeper than your thoughts. They live in your nervous system, in your automatic responses, in your unconscious behaviors. When you walk into a room, your story determines how you carry yourself. When you meet new people, your story decides how worthy you feel of their attention. When opportunities arise, your story whispers whether you deserve them or not. Your story affects everything. Your relationships, your career, your health, your happiness. It's the invisible force shaping every aspect of your experience. And until you see it clearly, you can't change it. Let me tell you what happens when you live unconsciously by these limiting stories. You start playing it safe. You avoid risks. You settle for less. You say yes when you mean no. You say no when you mean yes. You live a life that's smaller than what's possible for you. You develop what I call story addiction. You become addicted to being right about your limitations. You become addicted to the familiar pain of self-doubt. You become addicted to the comfort of staying small. Because even though it hurts, it's what you know. And here's the psychological danger most people miss. The longer you live by limiting stories, the more your brain confirms them as truth. Neural pathways strengthen. Patterns become automatic. What started as a story becomes your reality. You begin to sabotage opportunities that don't match your story. You unconsciously create evidence that supports your limitations. You attract people and situations that confirm your negative beliefs about yourself. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The cost is enormous. Dreams die, potential withers, relationships suffer. You live haunted by the gap between who you are and who you could be. But you tell yourself it's just the way things are. You tell yourself you're being realistic. Realistic. That's the story's favorite word. It uses realism as a weapon against possibility. It uses past evidence as proof of future limitation. It uses temporary setbacks as permanent verdicts. But here's what the story doesn't want you to know. Your past doesn't determine your future. Your history doesn't define your destiny. Your story is not your identity. It's just a story, and you have the power to change it. The first step is seeing the story for what it is. Not truth, not reality, just a narrative, a collection of thoughts and beliefs that you've been unconsciously accepting as fact. Start paying attention to your internal dialogue. Notice the words you use when you talk about yourself. Notice the assumptions you make about what's possible for you. Notice how often you say, I can't, or I'm not, or I don't. These aren't statements of fact. They're lines from your story. And once you see them as story elements rather than truth, something powerful happens. Distance, perspective, choice. You begin to realize that you're not your thoughts. You're the observer of your thoughts. You're not your story. You're the awareness that can witness the story. And from this place of awareness, transformation becomes possible. This shift in perspective is profound. Most people live their entire lives completely identified with their thoughts and stories. They never discover that there's a part of them that exists beyond the mental chatter. A part that can observe. A part that can choose. When you realize you can witness your thoughts instead of being consumed by them, everything changes. You discover that you have space between stimulus and response. Space between trigger and reaction. Space between old pattern and new choice. This space is sacred. This space is where your freedom lives. This space is where transformation happens. And the more you practice accessing this space, the more freedom you have to respond to life differently. Think about the last time you got angry or anxious or depressed. In that moment, you were completely identified with the emotion. You were the anger, you were the anxiety, you were the depression. There was no space, no perspective, no choice. But what if, in that same situation, you could step back and observe? What if you could notice the emotion arising without becoming it? What if you could say, I notice anger instead of I am angry? This small shift creates enormous possibility. The same thing happens with your limiting stories. When you're completely identified with them, they control you. But when you can observe them, you regain your power. You move from being the victim of your story to being the author of your experience. But awareness alone isn't enough. You need to actively challenge these stories. Question them, investigate them. Ask yourself, is this true? How do I know it's true? What evidence contradicts this belief? What would be possible if this story wasn't true? Here's a powerful practice that can accelerate your transformation. Every time you catch yourself thinking a limiting thought, pause and ask, who told me this? Really investigate. Where did this belief come from? Was it a parent, a teacher, a friend, society, the media? You'll be shocked to discover how many of your deepest beliefs about yourself aren't even yours. They're hand-me-downs. They're inherited limitations. They're other people's fears and insecurities that somehow became your identity. Once you see this clearly, something remarkable happens. You realize you have the power to give these beliefs back. You can return them to their source. You can say, this isn't mine. I don't want it anymore. I choose something different. This process of questioning and releasing isn't always comfortable. Your ego will resist. Your familiar sense of self will feel threatened. The identity you've carried for years will fight to survive. This is normal. This is necessary. This is how authentic change happens. You might feel lost for a while. You might wonder who you are without your old stories. You might feel like you're floating in space without familiar landmarks. This temporary disorientation is the price of freedom. It's the space between who you were and who you're becoming. Don't rush to fill this space with new stories. Don't grab the first identity that feels comfortable. Sit in the unknown for a while. Let yourself not know. Let yourself be undefined. Let yourself exist as pure potential. This is where your authentic self begins to emerge. Not the self that was constructed by circumstances and conditioning, not the self that was shaped by other people's expectations, but the self that exists beyond all stories. The self that is unlimited, the self that is free. From this place of open awareness, you can begin to consciously choose who you want to become, not based on old programming, not based on fear or limitation, but based on truth, based on love, based on the highest vision of what's possible for you. This is conscious creation. This is intentional transformation. This is the difference between living by default and living by design. And it's available to you right now. In this moment, with this choice, most of your limiting stories crumble under honest examination. They're built on shaky foundations, childhood interpretations, other people's opinions, isolated incidents blown out of proportion, cultural conditioning that never fits you anyway. The story tells you that changing is dangerous, that stepping outside your comfort zone will lead to disaster, that you're safer staying small. But this is the biggest lie of all. The greatest danger isn't in changing, it's in staying the same. Every day you live by limiting stories, you die a little. Your spirit contracts, your possibilities narrow. Your light dims. This isn't living. This is existing. And you were meant for so much more. Here's what I want you to understand about transformation. It doesn't happen by adding something new to your life. It happens by subtracting something old, by removing the stories that no longer serve you, by letting go of identities that limit you. You don't need to become someone else. You need to stop being who you never were. You need to peel away the layers of conditioning and story to reveal who you actually are underneath. Your authentic self. Your unlimited self. This work isn't easy. The story will fight back. It will tell you that you're fooling yourself, that you're being unrealistic, that you'll fail like you always do. It will use every trick in its arsenal to keep you small and safe and familiar. But remember this, the story's power comes from your unconscious agreement with it. The moment you withdraw that agreement, the moment you stop believing it, its power begins to dissolve. You have the right to rewrite your story. You have the right to question every limiting belief. You have the right to experiment with new possibilities. You have the right to become who you really are. Start small. Pick one limiting story that's been running your life. Maybe it's, I'm not smart enough, or I'm not worthy of love, or success isn't for people like me. Choose one. Just one. Now for the next week, act as if that story isn't true. Not permanently. Not forever. Just for 1 week. See what happens when you make choices from possibility instead of limitation. Notice how differently you feel, how differently others respond to you. This isn't about positive thinking or affirmations or pretending problems don't exist. This is about recognizing that most of your problems exist in your story, not in reality. This is about discovering that you have more power than you ever imagined. The stories that limit you today were created by someone who knew less than you know now. They were created by someone with less experience, less wisdom, less perspective. Why are you still letting that person's conclusions dictate your adult life? You wouldn't let a child drive your car. Don't let childhood stories drive your life. You wouldn't take financial advice from someone who's broke. Don't take life advice from outdated parts of yourself. Your story is not sacred. It's not special. It's not more true than any other story you could tell about yourself. It's just familiar. It's just comfortable. It's just what you've been unconsciously choosing. But consciousness changes everything. Awareness transforms everything. Choice empowers everything. And you have all three available to you right now. The question isn't whether you can change your story. The question is whether you will. The question isn't whether transformation is possible. The question is whether you're ready to stop defending your limitations and start exploring your possibilities. Your future self is waiting for you to let go of the stories that keep you small. Your potential is waiting for you to stop arguing for your weaknesses and start standing for your strengths. Your authentic life is waiting for you to stop living someone else's story and start writing your own. The stories that hold you back aren't stronger than you. They're just older than your awareness of your power to change them. They're just more practiced than your willingness to question them. They're just more familiar than your courage to replace them. But today can be different. Right now can be different. This moment can be the beginning of a new story, a story of possibility, a story of growth, a story of becoming who you were always meant to be. The old story served its purpose. It kept you safe when you were small. It protected you when you were vulnerable. But you're not small anymore. You're not vulnerable in the same ways. You don't need those old protections. You need new possibilities. And here's the beautiful truth that the limiting stories don't want you to discover. Underneath all the conditioning and fear and false beliefs, you are already whole. You are already enough. You are already capable of more than your stories have allowed you to see. The work isn't about becoming worthy. You're already worthy. The work isn't about becoming capable. You're already capable. The work is about removing the stories that block your awareness of your inherent worth and capability. But let's be honest about something. This work requires more than intellectual understanding. It requires emotional courage. It requires you to feel things you've been avoiding. It requires you to face truths you've been denying. It requires you to sit with discomfort you've been running from. Many people want transformation without discomfort. They want growth without growing pains. They want freedom without facing their fears. But this isn't how change works. This isn't how healing happens. This isn't how authentic transformation unfolds. You cannot think your way out of patterns that were created through experience. You cannot analyze your way out of stories that live in your body. You cannot reason your way out of beliefs that were formed before you could reason. The path to freedom goes through the very feelings you've been trying to avoid, the sadness you've been pushing down, the anger you've been suppressing, the fear you've been denying. These emotions aren't obstacles to your growth. They're gateways to your healing. When you were young and these limiting stories first formed, you probably didn't have the capacity to process the emotions involved. So you buried them. You created stories to explain them. You developed strategies to avoid feeling them again. But what you resist persists. What you don't feel, you cannot heal. What you don't face, you cannot release. The emotions you've been avoiding are still there, underneath your stories, driving your patterns, shaping your choices. This is why some people can understand their limitations intellectually but still feel powerless to change them. The understanding is in their head, but the pattern is in their heart. The insight is in their mind, but the wound is in their soul. Real transformation requires you to go deeper than thoughts, deeper than beliefs, deeper than stories. It requires you to connect with the original emotional experience that created the limitation in the first place, and then to feel it fully, to honor it completely, to heal it consciously. This isn't about reliving trauma. This isn't about getting stuck in the past. This is about completing experiences that were left incomplete. This is about feeling feelings that were never fully felt. This is about giving your younger self the compassion and understanding they needed then but didn't receive. When you can hold your pain with compassion instead of judgment, something miraculous happens. The pain begins to dissolve. The story loses its emotional charge. The pattern loses its power over you. You become free to choose differently. This is deep work, sacred work, necessary work. And it cannot be rushed, it cannot be forced, it cannot be bypassed, but it can be done with patience, with gentleness, with love for yourself and the journey you're on. You don't have to do this work alone. Find support. Find guidance. Find people who understand the path you're walking. Surround yourself with those who believe in your capacity to change and grow and heal. Remember, every limitation you carry was learned, and what was learned can be unlearned. Every story that restricts you was created, and what was created can be recreated. Every pattern that confines you was formed, and what was formed can be reformed. Every great person in history had to break free from limiting stories. Every breakthrough, every innovation, every transformation began with someone refusing to accept the story of what was supposed to be possible for them. You have that same power. You have that same choice. You have that same opportunity. The only question is whether you'll use it. Stop waiting for permission to rewrite your story. Stop waiting for proof that you can change. Stop waiting for the perfect moment or the right circumstances. The time is now. The place is here. The person is you. Your story has held you back long enough. It's time to set yourself free. It's time to discover what becomes possible when you stop living by limitations and start living by truth. The truth of who you really are. The truth of what you're really capable of. The truth of the extraordinary life that's waiting for you on the other side of your courage to change. Think about this for a moment. Every person you admire, every success story you've heard, every breakthrough that inspired you, they all began with someone recognizing that their current story wasn't their final story. They all started with someone saying, "This isn't who I really am." You might be thinking this sounds too simple, that changing decades of programming can't be this straightforward. And you're right to be cautious. But here's what I've learned after years of studying human transformation. The mechanism is simple. The application requires courage. Your brain has been running the same programs for so long that they feel like hardware. But they're software. And software can be updated. Your neural pathways have been carved deep by repetition. But new pathways can be created. Your habits have become automatic. But automation can be interrupted. The key is understanding that change doesn't happen in giant leaps. It happens in tiny choices. Moment by moment. Thought by thought. Story by story. Each time you catch yourself believing a limiting narrative and choose to question it instead, you're rewiring your brain. Each time you notice the old story arising and pause before automatically believing it, you're creating space. Space for new possibilities. Space for different choices. Space for growth. This space is where transformation lives. But here's what you need to know about this journey. Your old stories won't disappear quietly. They'll fight for survival. They'll bring up evidence from your past. They'll point to your failures. They'll remind you of every time you tried to change and didn't follow through. This is normal. This is expected. This is part of the process. The old stories are like a muscle that's been flexed for years. It doesn't want to relax. It doesn't want to let go. But with consistent practice, even the strongest grip eventually loosens. You'll have moments of doubt. Moments when the old story feels more real than the new possibility. Moments when you want to give up and go back to what's familiar. These moments are not evidence that you can't change. They're evidence that you're changing. Resistance is a sign that something significant is happening. Discomfort is proof that you're growing beyond your comfort zone. The very fact that your old stories are fighting back means they're losing their grip on you. Here's something most people don't realize about personal transformation. It's not a solo journey. The stories that limit you are often reinforced by other people. And breaking free from those stories might require you to change how you relate to those same people. Some people in your life are invested in your old story. They know how to relate to the limited version of you. They feel comfortable with your familiar struggles. When you start changing, it might make them uncomfortable. They might try to pull you back into old patterns. This doesn't make them bad people. It makes them human. We all resist change, even positive change, because it disrupts our sense of predictability. But you cannot let other people's comfort with your limitations become a reason to stay small. You might need to set boundaries. You might need to spend less time with people who reinforce limiting stories about you. You might need to find new communities that support your growth. This isn't about cutting people off. It's about protecting your transformation. Remember, you're not just changing yourself. You're changing the dynamics of every relationship you have. You're changing how people see you. You're changing what they can expect from you. Some will celebrate this, others will resist it. Both responses are information, not instructions. Your job isn't to make everyone comfortable with your growth. Your job is to honor the truth of who you're becoming. Your job is to be faithful to your own transformation, even when others prefer the old version of you. And here's something beautiful about this process. As you break free from your own limiting stories, you give others permission to break free from theirs. Your courage becomes contagious. Your growth becomes inspiring. Your transformation becomes a gift to everyone around you. You become living proof that change is possible. You become evidence that stories can be rewritten. You become a walking demonstration that we are not fixed beings, but growing, evolving, expanding expressions of life itself. The ripple effects of your personal transformation extend far beyond your individual life. They touch your family, your friends, your colleagues, your community. When you stop accepting limitations as truth, you create space for others to question their own limitations. This is why your transformation matters so much. It's not just about you living a better life. It's about you contributing to a world where limiting stories lose their power, where possibility becomes the default, where growth becomes normal. The story that's been running your life is ending, right here, right now. And the story of your transformation is just beginning. But more than that, you're becoming part of a larger story, a story of human potential awakening, a story of limitations dissolving, a story of what becomes possible when we stop defending our weaknesses and start expressing our strengths. This is your invitation. This is your moment. This is your chance to step out of the small story and into the magnificent truth of who you really are. The choice is yours. But understand this: not choosing is also a choice. Staying the same is also a decision. Remaining limited is also an act of will. You cannot claim powerlessness while simultaneously choosing limitation. You have everything you need to begin this transformation right now. You don't need more information. You don't need better circumstances. You don't need someone else's permission. You need the willingness to see your stories as stories and your limitations as choices. The moment you take full responsibility for the story you've been living, you claim full power to write a new one. The moment you stop being the victim of your past, you become the creator of your future. The moment you realize you've been unconsciously choosing limitation, you can consciously choose expansion. Your breakthrough is not a distant destination, it's an immediate possibility. It's available in this breath, in this thought, in this choice. The life you've been dreaming of isn't waiting for you to become someone else. It's waiting for you to stop being who you never were.